There are several segmenters found in Denari: Name Segmenter, Gift Segmenter, Pledge Segmenter, Sponsored Name Segmenter, and others. Segmenters are query tools that allow you to segment your data based on filters, and they give you a much expanded set of filters compared to the basic reports. There are two rules that you first need to know to work with segments. One, segments produce results based on their type. For example, Pledge Segmenter uses pledge characteristics as filters and outputs pledge information. So you can filter on things like start date, appeal codes, payment amount, ahead behind, etc., things that are associated with a pledge record. Knowing this helps you determine where you need to go to produce your report. Second, you only use the filters that you need. All of the segmenters and most reports in Denari start with all records. So for example, if you want a list of all your pledges, you could create a pledge segment and use no filters. If you then only want those gifts in a specific date range, you will use only that filter. Since you're starting with all pledges, you're reaching into the pledge bucket and pulling out only those that fit in that date range. Let's start by finding a list of pledges that were made at our fundraising banquet, but the donors are behind in their payments. Each of your fundraising efforts can be represented by an appeal code. An appeal code can be either a gift characteristic or a pledge characteristic, so should we go to Gift Segmenter or Pledge Segmenter? We also want to find out who's behind in their pledge, so that answers the question. We need to go to Pledge Segmenter. For that, we'll click on the Reports button here on the left. Then Query Tools, and then Pledge Segmenter. Here we see a list of the pledge segments that someone has already created. We can set up a segment, save it, and use it again in the future by searching for it, selecting it, and running the segment. I'll click on Add New here to create a new segment. The first thing we need to do is give it a description and a segment code. These fields are just like all other records you create in Denari. The description is for you and tells you what the segment is about. The code is for Denari. So the description can be anything you want, but the code must be unique. You can't have two pledge segments in the same code. I'm just going to type training video in the description field and enter my initials followed by a number in the code field, and that number really has no significance here. Below, we find two sections of filter options: pledges and statistics. In this case, we want to find the pledges to our banquet appeal. So I'll expand the pledge section here because I know that the appeal code field is in that section. Choose equal to as the operator, and in the low value field I can either type in the appeal code if I know what it is, or I can click on the search icon on the right search for it here and then select it, and I'll just select one here at random. Since I'm using equal to, I don't need anything in the high value field. At this point, this segment will give me all pledges with that appeal code. But we also want to find out which of these pledges are behind, and I know that the ahead behind field is found in the statistics section, so we'll go there. You may remember from the video on pledges that the ahead behind field shows the difference between the due so far and the given fields. Due so far is calculated by totaling what they should have paid to date. If they have a $50 per month pledge and they are 3 months into the pledge, then due so far is $150. So ahead behind then compares that to what they have actually given. If they have given less than the due so far, in this case $150, then Denari will show the ahead behind as a negative number, If this donor has only given $100, then you'll see a negative $50 in the ahead behind field. To find those pledges with negative amounts in that field, we'll choose less than as the operator and enter 0 in the low value field. This filter then is simply looking for any pledge whose less than field or whose ahead behind field is less than 0 or is negative. Denari will now put the two filters together when you run the segment. It will find all pledges with the banquet appeal code and that show a negative number in the ahead behind field. In other words, there is an AND operator between the filters, and that's true for all the filters in the segment. All of the filters that you use here, and again, reminder, you don't have to use any of them, but any that you do use require an operator, and most of these are fairly self-explanatory. As you saw, there's things like equal to, less than, greater than, etc. And if you're using those, you only need a value in the low value field. If you use operators like between, you do need to put something in the high value field to establish the range. In the date fields, like start date, you also have relative date options. Relative simply means relative to the day you run the segment. Here we see things like this year, this month, last year, yesterday, and others. When you use one of those, you don't need to put anything in the low and high value fields. Relative date ranges are helpful when you want to run a segment on a regular basis. Say, for example, you want a list of pledges that are behind on the first of every month. You can create the segment using last month as the date range and then not have to change the dates each time you run the report. This is especially helpful when you memorize the report to run automatically, which we'll see later. Many of the filters in this pledge segment are intuitive, but some do need some explanation. Let's go through them. The first two, sponsored name segment and sponsorship code, will only show up in your company if you're using the sponsorship module. The sponsored name segment field allows you to create a segment to filter on specific sponsorship characteristics and then use that filter for the pledge segment. For example, you might want to get pledge information about children being sponsored from a specific community. Since community is a sponsored name characteristic, you won't find that as a filter in the pledge segment, but linking the sponsored name segment will allow you to do that. The sponsorship code field is used for specific sponsored name records or range of codes. This is most valuable when you want to pledge information for one sponsored name. You could choose equal to as the operator and then enter the sponsored name code in the low value field. You will then get a list of all the pledges for that sponsored name. And of course, you could put a range of codes here by using between as the operator and enter codes in the low and high value fields. Remember, when you use a range, Denari will evaluate the values in those fields alphabetically or numerically. Since many of the filters here are self-explanatory, let's skip down to the day of the month and the next transaction date. These are, of course, credit card and EFT related fields. I want to point them out here because they are an easy way to get a list of pledges that are set to transact in the future. For example, you could use between as the operator in the day of the month field, and then enter a 1 in the low value field and a 15 in the high value field to get a list of pledges that are set to transact in that range between the 1st and the 15th of each month. You could also then go to the frequency field above and choose monthly to get monthly pledges that will transact between those dates. You can do the same thing with the transaction date. Again, you could use between and enter a date range of, let's say, January 1st, 2016 through January 31st, 2016 to find pledges that will transact in that specific time period. One popular use for this is to combine the frequency field of annually to find annual pledges that are set to transact in a specific month. Some organizations send pledge statements to annual pledges to remind them that their transaction is about to occur and can use this combination of fields. Near the bottom of the section, we find the closed field. By default, Denari will give you all pledges both open and closed. So if you want to confine your output to just open pledges, you need to select that here. The EFT field allows you to select only EFT pledges or pledges that are not EFT, and that works the same way for the credit card field. In the electronic payment field, we can exclude both EFT and credit cards from our output or choose only EFT or credit card pledges. Again, let me emphasize here that this is an AND operator between all the filters. So if you select payment by EFT or credit card and then also select monthly in the frequency field, you will get pledges that are monthly pledges being paid by credit card or EFT. I'm skipping over some of these fields in this section so that we can focus more on the statistics section below. But if you have any questions about the fields here, please contact support. Let's take a break now and we'll pick this up in the next session.